Welcome to the fourth episode in the Leading with Influence series. We're meeting with outstanding thought leaders, authors, and legal professionals to shed light on challenges and opportunities that come together when you're a leader. The Leading with Influence is connected with a research study which we conducted last year. We sought to answer one question: what are the exceptional traits and characteristics of fantastic leaders? The research came out with top 6, and it is now available as a resource to you in the form of a report. And I think you'll see shortly a link in the chat, so check it out. Please feel to download it. It is packed with ideas and tips on how to increase some of those core 6 competencies that we identified. Thank you to those who participated. Of course, some of you took time to fill in our questionnaire, and also you've met with us during the qualitative research part. So really, thank you so much for your time. Without you, that research report would have been rather empty. What I wanted to say is that for those of you who do not, might be for the first time meeting us today, my name is Lazarus. I'm the founder of Lazarus and Maverick. We are a team of experts on behavior change, leadership excellence, organizational transformation, and really just trying to help leaders, their teams, and organizations to have a greater impact. So what's coming up in today's session is the 4th one in the series. Before I tell you what we're going to be talking about, I would love you to make sure you know what the chat is and give me a quick yes, no, or maybe as I read you the following sentence. For full disclosure, I will have to say yes to each of the questions I'm going to read out to you. So here it is. Have you ever dreaded Sunday night, got a pit in your stomach on the way to work, or your heartbeat speed up at the sound of your boss's voice? Let me have a look at the chat. Yes, we got a few yeses. All right. Louis, I want to talk to you. I want to know how you did that. Okay, well, thank you for sharing this with us, because you probably have experienced what we call anxiety at work. And we today going to explore 3 competencies that were linked to the report. It's going to be the first one being interpersonally astute. What does it mean? It's how we bring ourselves as leaders to different contexts, relationships, and interactions. The second one is working under pressure. And the third one, working together. And I'm delighted, really excited that today, one of our guests is Adrian Gostick, best-selling author, New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal, for books such as All In, The Carrot Principles, Leading with Gratitude, and Anxiety at Work. Adrian is an award-winning book author. His book's been translated in 30 languages, sold over 1.5 million copies. And Adrian regularly writes for Forbes, appears on NBC Today Show, CNN, CNBC, and of course, he's with us today as well in a webinar, which is put together in association with Global Leaders in Law, Morrison Foerster, and myself, Lazarus. So Adrian, welcome. And it's great to have you here today. Very shortly, I'll ask you to continue with the introduction yourself. Our second guest is Bradley Wine from Morrison Foerster, who is the global co-chair of Morrison Foerster Litigation Department and also serves as chair of the firm's Israel practice. Brad has a proven track record of saving and recovering billions of dollars for clients by providing strategic business advice, navigating global regulatory compliance, and securing complex judgments and settlements. To me, it sounds a bit like a James Bond job. I think it sounds fantastic. But Bradley is also, on top of that, he's also mental health steering committee at Morrison Foerster. And it is one of the reasons why Brad is joining us today to share some of his lessons learned and examples of what we can do as leaders to tackle mental health. So welcome, both of you.
Thanks, Alex.
Adrian, what brings you to be here with us and the interest in the topic?
Oh, thanks, Alex. Yeah, no, and I love that you and your organization have studied this idea of what makes a great leader, because that has changed in the last few years. For the last 20 years, I've been studying workplace culture, working with a lot of executives on doing executive coaching. And you asked me a couple of years ago what the top drivers of great leadership were. I would have said transparency, clarity of message, all these, strategy, all these wonderful ideas. Today, I would say it's empathy. It's understanding what your people are going through, because anxiety levels are rising like we've never seen before. So that's what brings me here today, is this mission to talk about anxiety at work and what we can do as leaders to help.
Brilliant. Thank you. Bradley, what
Alex,
brings you here today?
Thank you for having me. I think that, like Adrian said, we're realizing on an increasing basis that in order to get the best from our people, we have to understand where they are in their lives, in their practice, what they need, how we can help them, and that we inevitably get best and highest from folks on our teams when we understand those things, and when we can work with them with empathy and understanding from a genuine place. And while we were talking about that well before the pandemic, is something that was imperative for the legal practice. I think that's true whether you're at a firm, large or small, or whether you're in-house at a company. It became even more important during the pandemic because lives were interrupted in a variety of ways. And in order to continue to be able to engage our folks, in order to continue to be able to get excellent work product out of them, we had to understand a bit more how this pandemic was affecting them, and then work with them to meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm. Understand. Thank you. Can I ask you both, have you had a personal experience that you're comfortable sharing where you knew this is a vital topic to be a part of that conversation?
I'm happy to go first. My son Anthony, he's 25. He's a brilliant young man. He's a genetics researcher. Has really accomplished some great things despite living all his life with anxiety. And he's really taught me a lot. In fact, he helped us write this new book, Anxiety at Work. We had him involved because he brought to us a lot of younger people that we interviewed, dozens and dozens. And these are many of the younger people who are joining your firms. And what they told us to a person was that we talk about, us younger people, we talk about anxiety all the time. And you oldies, you never talk about it. And what's really interesting is that right now we're seeing the statistics of 50% of millennials have quit a job for mental health reasons, but 75% of Gen Z, so those people in their early 20s, those new people coming out of law school, maybe that you're trying to lure to your companies, your firms, those are the people that are very aware of this topic. And if we don't start, I just love what Bradley said, if we don't start talking about this, we're not going to keep these people. We're going to be alone trying to do the work that we need to create.
Yeah. I will readily admit and share with you that, as I have internally with a number of my colleagues, that for probably the better part of my adult life, I have dealt with successfully and mostly unsuccessfully up until probably the last 3 to 5 years, both anxiety and depression. It was something that I had not put a finger on, understood. I rationalized it as a coping mechanism for one of the reasons why I was successful as a student or as a professional. And then I became a co-leader of our department and realized that I could actually do quite a bit with sharing my experience, because I was watching mostly young people, but some peers suffering with similar issues. And inevitably, I suspected that they felt that they were fairly alone in that, and not in a place where they felt as professionals they could share that there were things that from a wellness perspective presented difficulties. And in the wake of that, have found that that's created agency, created a space in which people could share their own experiences and be genuine and somewhat vulnerable which for the vast majority of my 26-year legal career was absolutely not what you did. You put up this facade, you created this appearance as though you were always under control, you are always able to meet any challenge. And in reality, on the inside, you're suffering a fair bit. And so it's important for folks to know that it's normal to confront anxiety and fear and issues throughout their life. And we can teach them ways to cope and deal with and let that moment pass through, and continue to provide exceptional counseling, advice, whatnot, as an outside trusted advisor. And in reality, that anxiety is not a coping mechanism. That's energy that you can spend in other pursuits, in your practice and whatnot, making you a better individual, and as a result, a better advisor, a better lawyer.
That's exceptional story. Thank you both for sharing your personal stories. It takes courage and strength to be normal these days, because that is normal. That is normal. I remember, when we talk about 10, 20 years ago, you were, you were told you might not be cut out for this job, right? Suck it up. You're not cut out for this job. You cannot do that. You cannot do that. And I am so incredibly happy to see that organizations are waking up to the true biochemical, neuroscientific proof that humans need to operate on the basis of empathy. And people who play to the strengths, they are 6 times happier, more engaged at work, they are more resilient. It's one of the things that we really put forward very strongly when we design our leadership programs with clients. And sometimes clients will say, well, will there be time to talk about things that people need to develop rather than celebrate their strengths? And the paradox here is that actually, if you do play to your strengths, you are more likely to be willing and open-minded to learn new things. So it's about not suppressing the natural self. I wanted to ask you, Adrian, what was the most insightful, maybe surprising thing for you as you were researching for the lead up to anxiety at work?
A couple of surprising things, Alex. First off was this generational divide that the younger folks we did interview, and dozens of these younger people coming into the workplace, they do talk about this, as we mentioned, all the time, and yet it's a generational issue. The second is that there are some simple things that we really can do, but we're not doing right now. The number one issue that workplaces, doesn't matter if you're running a legal firm or you're running IBM, the number one issue that our people are dealing with is uncertainty. And that's something that we can actually work on, and we can actually help with to bring down anxiety levels. And you may think, well, we're in uncertain times right now, but we can help people feel like we're coming through this together. So one of the things there's a couple of things I need to understand as an employee. First off, where are we heading as a firm? What's our strategy? Well, and you may think, well, we talked about this in January at a big company meeting. What have you done this week to help me understand our strategy? Where are we heading? Secondly, am I adding value? Am I fitting in? Have you helped me understand to bring down my anxiety level to let me know I am adding value and this is how? And the third is, do I have a future here? Am I growing? Am I able to keep learning and developing? They may sound like really simple ideas, but what was surprising that so few people felt like those uncertainty ideas were addressed by their leaders at all. So there's some simple things we can do that we're really not doing right now to help.
So to build on that, Brad, if I flip into your corporate environment, what does Morrison Foerster do? And you will know because you're on the steering committee for mental health. What do you do to shift that needle towards understanding and destigmatizing the topic?
I think one of the biggest things that we do as an organization, one of the most impactful things that we do as an organization, is to communicate with folks. That we, on a regular basis, have done, I think, a very good job checking in with individuals and asking very basically, how are you? And not in a way, or not allowing it to just pass the way I would with my teenage son, where I ask, how are you? And I fine, and then pass him to the next room, but really a meaningful, tell me what's going on. How's your family? How are you? You know, basically understanding where folks are, and communicating broadly to the entire institution, lawyers and non-lawyer professionals alike, about the challenges we're all confronting. And to make sure that we have this open sense of community, that the kinds of things you're feeling. You know, early in the pandemic, how many of you were having either trouble sleeping or really weird dreams and thought, my body is reacting in weird ways? The reality is we were experiencing some form of trauma, and I use that word cautiously, and our body was reacting to it. And there were studies written about it and articles and things like that. And so when we saw that, we distributed and said, what you're feeling is normal. Your colleagues are feeling that way too. Because in an ordinary set of circumstances, maybe individuals would around the water cooler talk about that. But when they're all distributed in various environments, mostly at home, but in various locales around the globe, they lack that opportunity. So we had to, in a very meaningful way, communicate with our folks and let them know that what they were experiencing was fine. If they needed help, ask for it, check in on your colleagues and make sure they're doing okay. But basically, we've got each other here. We're going to get through this okay and actually be on the other side in a much better place than we were when we went into the pandemic. And I think that growth during this period is real and is significant. We're seeing it. And organizations that don't take advantage of those transformational opportunities created by the pandemic are actually going to lose out on a wonderful opportunity to get out of this period of time even stronger than they were beforehand.
Well, that's a huge leap from the early days, somewhat 15 years ago or so, when I was discussing similar things, not really having the terminology yet for it. And people would say, I'm not very well, or I need to go to the doctor, and I'm just getting my teammates to cover for me so the boss doesn't find out that I'm at the doctor, so he or she doesn't think I'm not particularly well. Because if I am, appraisals are coming up and performance conversations are coming up, I better just cover it up. And it was, I think one of you said it is, we wear our sort of physical wounds as badge of honor, but our mental ones we cover up because, we may be used to this is really changing, which is why we're having this conversation. Adrian, could you tell us about the cost? So I'm going to kind of ask a bit of a cold question here, but what's the cost to the industry that is caused by stress and anxiety?
Well, there's lots of numbers on these, and being attorneys, you know how to build a case, and sometimes there's so many factors that go into this. The estimates are anywhere from $40 billion a year in the US alone, 600 billion euros in year. We can throw a lot of numbers out, but really, what does it mean to my organization? Just about every leader that I've interviewed has had a story of at least one high performance employee who seemed to burn out. They just didn't, they weren't able to, as we talked about before, hack it. And many cases they thought, well, this is just what it's like around here. They're weeding themselves out. But what they were losing were really talented people that if they just led in a little different way, they would really find some really talented people if we were able to have a little bit more discussion around mental health. And so what we're finding is these great leaders like Brad and his firm, there's a couple of simple things they're doing. First off, they're normalizing the discussion around anxiety, mental health, depression. Secondly, they're destigmatizing it. So this is a normal human emotion, as we talked about. And take away the myths like, people with anxiety, they just can't hack it. Well, in many cases, Mensa members have anxiety at twice the level of people in the normal population. Very smart people have anxiety because our brains are wired to keep us safe. They're not wired to keep us happy. And so smart people have more anxiety because they see more concerns and it's worked on them over their lifetime. And the last thing, and we've talked about, and we keep talking about, is this idea that leaders have to empathize. And that's very different than sympathy. Sympathy is, I'm strong, you're weak, let me help you. That's not really helpful. Nobody will really open up to somebody like that. Empathy is, I've been there before. Like Brad was so vulnerable. I may not understand exactly what you're going for, but I've been in a dark place too. Let me help you. What can I do? What can we do in this work experience to help you through this?
Yeah, thank you. I think from my position as a coach and as a person who brings experiences here to the table, I really see a lot of instances where we are asked to coach senior leaders and leaders. They are overwhelming majority of high achievers, people who are exceptionally bright, incredible experts in the field, but who by some default don't talk about certain issues that are hard to talk about. They cannot find that peer connection unless it's an organization like yours, Brad, where you do have a kind of a very explicit way of addressing this. But a lot of the execs that I have worked with, there is an underlying almost near burnout place, because also people who are high achievers, they don't quite recognize the symptoms when they're about to hit that wall, go, whoa, I can't actually wake up. I don't want to go to work. I cannot face this anymore. And it's that, it's probably one of the things that I've been really careful about myself as well. Where do I recognize what's happening in my life? What's happening to myself, my health, my mental, my thought process, my tolerance, everything, where I know, okay, it's time to retreat. It's time to go back a little bit. Not cancel necessary things, but uncommit, create some space and reach out to people who give me a sense of calm, belonging, and a bit of sanity. I thought I was doing really well, relatively well, considering I had homeschooling with 3 kids during the pandemic. I thought 31st of December, I'm like, yeah, we got through this. And then bang, January came. I was like, what's happening to me? I just had no energy. I couldn't do anything. And I knew that. I recognized that what's just happened is I just got burned out. And I knew that, or maybe I was very close to. So thanks to a few of our friends from our network, it was a case of, right, let's just go running. We've got to keep on running. It took me 181 miles to start running. It was 180 miles that dragged my feet forward, thinking, I hate this. And then 180 miles and thinking, okay, I got it. I can move forward faster. But it was a case of putting aside projects that really were not that rewarding, being very careful about preserving my space, my time, my family. And I think it's from a coaching perspective, when I work with my clients, I'll ask them to be very clear, what does great look like when they're feeling great, right? To be really honest with themselves. It's not the show, it's not the facade, as you said, Brad, that we put up. It's the real feeling when in the evening we're facing ourselves in the mirror and we can say, how are we doing? How am I really doing on a scale of 1 to 10? And everybody's unique in how they experience the great, but to have the time to reflect and to have some peers with whom you can share this is really important. Brad, I wanted to ask you, and everybody, thanks for we've got 113 people here on the line today. Please feel free to comment in the chat or ask us questions in the Q&A. We are going to start addressing all the questions that will come through. Just give us a couple of more minutes. In the meantime, if any of this resonates with you, please use the chat. So let me know how you are experiencing this webinar as well. Brad, what advice would you give to your younger self?
It'd be a long conversation, Alex. But I think it basically comes down to this: everything is going to be okay. I think that particularly folks that find their way into the law, and I've done a lot of thought about whether the legal industry creates these issues, the anxiety, the depression, whatnot, or whether or not people that are predisposed to feel those ways more than the general population gravitate to the law. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's an interesting way of processing it. I think that we are perhaps the high achieving individuals, Alex, that you described. And historically, the notion was that in order to be high achieving and successful, you had to be in control. You had to extend an aura about you of professionalism and whatnot. And I think I've come to the realization as I've entered my 50s that being high achieving and being vulnerable are not mutually exclusive. That in point of fact, I can be high achieving and actually excel by being vulnerable, by understanding and demonstrating to my folks, my team, the colleagues that I have younger and my age, that we can be who we are. And in fact, we have to focus on our complete selves in order to be the best lawyer we can be. And if we're doing the work at the expense of ourselves, that may work for a short period of time, but it doesn't last forever. And so if we're going to run this marathon, if we're going to run 181 miles or whatever it is, we've got to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, and recognize when we're vulnerable, and help others who are as well. The idea that if you can't hack it as an associate because you can't bill X number of hours or whatnot, that's one way to lead. And there are certainly organizations that lead that way. But I find that as a leader of my organizations, of my teams, that I get more out of my team members when I thank them for the work that they do, when I appreciate what they work to do, that I can encourage them, and that I allow them some space to be with their families. I never want someone on my team to have to choose between going to a kid's soccer game or doing additional research, recognizing, and they do, that sometimes client demands require us to rearrange schedules and whatnot. But it is recognizing that we can be genuine and authentic, and as a result, get the most out of the people with whom we work.
I just want to recognize what a long way we've come. We've come a long way. For you, for us to be tackling this, in general public, you representing a corporate entity, and me representing lots of different people that I work with and brands we work with, and we can talk about this. And it's not behind closed doors. I really want to celebrate that, because we have come a long way. We would not have been able to talk like this 10 years, 15 years ago.
Well, I'm interested in what Adrian thinks about this, and from your own experience too, Alex, but I think in so many ways, we're used to taking the young people that enter the profession, and it's a practice, right? You learn and you develop over time, and you become more capable of an advisor. I think in so many ways, our young people and the workforce are pulling us in this direction. They'll say, yeah, we know that y'all did it this way before, but this is the way I work the best. And you can I have some, not a lot, but some colleagues that say, in my day, we didn't care what you had going on at home. You had to be in the office, you had to do the work, you had to get it done, and just focus on the best lawyer you can be. And my response to them is, that may have worked or not. That may have been the case, but the reality is the workplace has shifted, and you got to go to war with the army you've got. And if you're not ready to meet this workforce where they are, they just won't work for you. Yeah. And that's not something that we can sustain organizations with either. Adrian, I don't know if that's.
I think Brad.
I also just wanted to look at this one. So I've got Adrian's 2 book for those of you who are with us, and Adrian's work is new to you. I mean, this is leading with gratitude. I think that if you lead with gratitude, if you take yourself as an entity, human being with gratitude, you might have a little less of this. So these two are very, very related. Adrian, over to you.
Oh, thanks. No, and Brad, I mean, you literally should have a microphone, and it just dropped it after that, because that was beautiful and brilliant. Because Brad's exactly right. We will be alone. It may be working right now, and this is what's so interesting is, my brother-in-law, he's a physician, and he's after his medical school, he spent a year training to become a surgeon. What's interesting, he doesn't remember that year hardly at all. He was so sleep deprived And they put him through this thing where you're 4 days on, this, that, just an hour of sleep here and there. And when I asked him, why did they do that? He says, because they were trained that way. And I said, well, when you become a surgeon, are you sleep deprived? He says, oh gosh, no. No, you work 8 to 5 and you do your surgeries. And so why do you do that? It's because we've always done it that way. And so what we're realizing, and we're seeing this with other, you see it with so many, legal firms, you see it with Wall Street, where you have this culture that's so hard driving. And the question is why? Well, it's the way we've always done it. And so what Brad is saying, who is one of these, sort of awakened leaders who realizes we're going to be alone pretty soon, if we're not right now. And we're also attracting only a certain type of person that maybe you want, but what are you leaving out? Are you leaving out all those people? Again, 75% of Gen Z or Gen Z have quit for mental health reasons. That's a lot of people we're leaving out of our talent pool that we have to be considering. Do we need to do things another way? A CEO recently told me, he says, in the past, we've actually used anxiety as a weapon to get people to work harder. And yet in the same conversation, he said, the people who win the talent war will win in the next decade or so. And so we've got this disconnect that we've got to change the way we're thinking, the way we're leading.
Great. We've got 2 questions. Thank you so much, Adrian. We've got 2 questions so far in a Q&A, which we will address in a moment. I wanted to ask you, well, if you could think of top 3 tips that you could give to either leaders or organizations, something that's really practical that anybody could do from tomorrow.
Adrian, you want to start?
Oh,
yeah, sure. I'll jump in, Brad.
To him.
Wherever we are and you're on your Zoom here. One thing is perfectionism. I assure you that you've got people within your firm, within your team, within your department who are feeling it's hard to get started because of perfectionism. So this is something we're seeing a lot of, especially in high achievers, where maybe it's hard to get started, or in an irony, they actually do worse work because they're so paranoid by perfectionism. I was just doing a session recently for a hospital system, and one of the pediatric surgeons was nodding her head. And I said, okay, Dr. Allison, why are you thinking this? She says, I had this problem early in my career where you're so worried about being perfect that you end up making more mistakes, or you end up, not really wanting to get started. She says, I see it with my nurses who work with me, my lab techs, my younger, surgeons that are coming in. And so how often does this happen? So we have to help people understand, of course, you want to do the best work you can in your firm. We have to help people understand this is what good enough looks like, because it's going to take an infinite amount of iterations to get from good to perfect. We have to maybe sometimes team them up. If people are being incredibly, too detail oriented, we team them up with people who just get stuff done. Maybe they can help each other. And it really comes into check-ins. Are we checking in with our people regularly? What are you working on this week? What's keeping you from getting started on that assignment, that project, that brief, whatever you're working on? Really helping people at a very, simple level with this idea of perfectionism can really bring down anxiety levels.
That's fantastic. One thing, if we can walk away from this session, is define what good enough looks like. If you've got a solid team and good team, they'll go way and beyond. But good enough, it'll free people of that anxiety that veers into perfectionism. Thanks, Adrian. This is great. Brad, what would be your top 3?
Yeah, so I would piggyback on some of Adrian's. And first, I'd give you probably a couple. First is you need to be authentic, and you need to, when you're having these conversations with you folks, when you're talking with them and you're doing a check-in and how you doing. And I'm guilty of this sometimes too. It's very easy when we're on one of these webcams, which we've had to be for the better part of the last year, and be talking to this person, but looking at this screen over here and doing some email checking or looking at something over here. It's the same thing as if you were in person and you go to a meeting and you've got folks sitting around the table with these devices, and while you're having the meeting, you're watching this happen, that they're not there. I would offer to you, A, you're having an inauthentic conversation, but B, you're probably doing more damage by trying to have the conversation and not being there than not trying at all. Because when you say, oh, let's check in, let's see how we're doing, let's have a conversation about your professional, whatever it is, it's inauthentic. It feels to the person that you're working with that you're just checking the box. The other thing that I'd stress, and I stress with the teams that I work with, is kind of noisy leadership. I don't remember if it was Adrian or you, Alex, that gave the example. I think it was Alex that when we were associates, we would say, I've got a meeting out of the office, and go to a doctor's appointment or go to one of our kids' soccer games or something like that, because we didn't want to be perceived as not doing work at that point in time. And the reality is, we're all human beings. Sometimes you have to go to the doctor. Some of us have our parents. We'd like to watch our kids play soccer. And so what I will do, and what I'm encouraging my colleagues to do, is to communicate that. Hey, I'm going to go have lunch with my daughter today. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be offline for this period of time. And implicitly, and sometimes I say it explicitly, when they've got the same kind of choices to make, when they have the same types of opportunities, I want to encourage them to take those opportunities. I'll go a step back a little bit, but I don't think it's inconsistent with anything that we've been talking about. As an outside advisor, good enough isn't good enough for my clients. I do have to constantly be stressing and producing exceptional work product. I have to have them looking at the bill that I send them and not say, oh my gosh, but it was worth every penny, and probably even more. And so we as a team have to drive to that exceptionalism for clients. The one thing I tell our teams, the way we do that, because perfectionism is really a difficult place to be, is that we're not solo practitioners. We chose to come to a large firm so that we can rely on each other, that we can work together, and we can accomplish those things together, whether it's editing or critiquing others' work product or sharing ideas and things like that. And so the way we get to perfect is not one individual being perfect all the time. It's all of us working together and supporting work product that is worthy of our clients' confidence.
Thank you very much. And in fact, that what you're talking about, which is the working together, it did make to our top competencies of exceptional leadership. And this is a really, really important one. I can see how it can rescue. One tip from me, I would say, and it might sound slightly strange from a coach's mouth, but I don't believe in unlimited potential. I'll never say to somebody, you've got unlimited potential. No, our potential is really limited. So be careful what you do with it. Be careful who you give your time to, your energy to, how you spend your daily energy, what you consume, who you meet, what work you do. Be really at one with yourself, how aligned what you do for a living is with who you genuinely are. Get to know yourself, increase your self-awareness. And the other thing I'll say is, I'm sure many of you know the Maslow, the famous Maslow hierarchy of needs, where the top is self-actualization. Well, I think the pandemic had showed us that maybe it's just not quite that. Maybe it is the belonging, and it's the community, and it's the acceptance, and it's the love that actually sits there at the top that can really help us through hard times. Lovely. Well, we've got some questions. And Whitney, yes, this session will be recorded. Thanks for asking. Augusta, thanks for commenting on some of our conversations, and Jani as well. I'm really pleased that you find this conversation very valuable. So the first question we've got is from Ian and Nemerov. How much of the current sense, let me just pull it here, how much of the current sense of greater anxiety is driven by being in a society that is increasingly feels like everyone is driven by personal desires, and decreased sense of everyone being in it together?
It's such an interesting question. Thanks for asking that, because we are seeing societal trends that are moving to higher anxiety levels. We are seeing, this is not just a case of younger people talking more about anxiety. We're seeing more anxiety created by societal issues. First off, we have social media where everybody is comparing themselves to everybody else. It's created a very, as you mentioned, individualized, in your question, very individualized culture, but also a culture that is ripe for anxiety. Because when we compare ourselves to others, nothing really good comes of that. Eventually, we're going to be disappointed, and probably on a very regular basis. we also societally, we have to consider too, we as parents have raised a very anxious generation. We've done things like, we've put them through school shooter drills. So active shooters, imagine coming into their schools, they're little school children and they're hunkering under desks, they're finding places to hide. So now that they're in college, they go to a movie theater, they're looking for exits. They're looking to imagine what will happen if somebody comes to the door with a gun. This is really frightening. And so we've created all this anxiety, and we've got to also find ways then to bring it down in our workplaces. We've got to find ways to address it. So absolutely, society has contributed, not only from these things we've done, but also, as you mentioned, from a very individualized perspective right now. The answer, as Brad said a minute ago, is community. It's having a place where people can go. And to be pretty dour right now, people who end up ending their own lives, most cases felt like there was nobody around for them. They didn't have anyone who would understand. So the message we have to express to everybody on our team is, you're not alone. I'm here no matter what you're facing. I'm here with you.
Yeah, I agree completely with Adrian. I'd also suggest to Ian that sense of community and the drive and personal drive are not mutually exclusive. That as a leader, but there are certainly personal drive at the expense of community, sharp elbows. That's a difficult situation. That does not work in every organization. There's some organizations where people excel there, not in the firm that I have the good fortune of being a partner in, and not in any organization that I want to build. What I do talk to folks about is, what is professionally rewarding to you? What do you want to accomplish besides getting a paycheck, besides the elite nature of being called an attorney, all of those things? What is going to get you excited about getting up in the morning and going to work, even if it's going downstairs or to the next room? What is it that fulfills you on a regular basis? And that's a personal and selfish thing. But when you get a group of individuals who have complementary, sometimes inconsistent personal goals, and you find a way to put them all in an organization, this gets to also the concept of diversity that we've talked about in other sessions, where different people with different goals and objectives look at the problem in different ways and come to great solutions. That's when really magical stuff happens, that people want to come to work because you're providing them an environment that is also one that they get excited about, but that we can do them collectively. The best organizations in this world are ones that are able to harness both of those things together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We've got a second question. I'm just quickly going to add something that I've observed with clients and through the sort of the nature and the science of behavior, how we behave and who we are, personality lens, etc. So a slight scientific maybe approach to that is that we as human beings, we all really quite different. There might be somebody that is very whose life rhythm is very regular. I wake up in the morning and I do this every day. I'm very structured, I'm very organized, I'm very disciplined. And so this person's sort of input and output will be very similar every day. Then there are other folks who are much less maybe predictable in the rhythm, in the life rhythm. And you've got to read yourself. You have to accept that you might be much more inspiration driven individual who works in passionate bursts and then slows down for a period of time. And that's okay. Sometimes we go fast, sometimes we go slow, sometimes we stop. Right? I'm not talking about being necessarily professionally completely on pause, but we have to give ourselves that acceptance that we're not always on the same rhythm. Sometimes I have clients who will say, I've had a really bad week and I'm feeling awful about it. When I ask the clients to explain what went on in that week, I'll think, I'm seeing a pattern here with you that kind of like every other month, you've got this 1 week, a bit like nature, just going in for a tiny bit of hibernation, which is actually quite a healthy thing to do. We've got a second
Alex,
question.
Before you go on, I mean, you're so spot on in realizing that, or pointing out that everyone's situation is different. And in particular, during the last year, everyone's situation was very different. We messaged very early on in the goal of demonstrating our support for our colleagues. One of our early messages in March of last year was, we're all in this together. And then after a week or two of being in pandemic and lockdown together, we realized we are all experiencing this very differently. You know, my wife and I had just graduated, two kids, one from college, one from high school. We were now empty nesters, but I had associates that had brand new babies in a 600 square foot efficiency apartment. And the husband and wife were trying to figure out how to manage and both work at the same time, things like that. The reality is we're not all in it together. We're not experiencing the pandemic. We don't experience life in our profession the same way, but we can have each other's back. We can care about each other and make sure that we understand where it is that our colleagues are coming from so that we can help them in any way we possibly can.
Wonderful, thank you. Brad, it's down to that communication that you also said at the very beginning. What is the one thing that changed? You said it's communication, it's daily check-ins. Quite often with our associates, when we get together, we have, there are a group of us that are very going quickly into ideations. They've got ideas. We want to, brainstorm what programs we can design, how to address clients' needs. But we also know that in order to check in properly, we have 4 colors that we use for our meetings. And it's a kind of a verbal command that we say, it's like, okay, let's start green. So green for us is the language of connection. How are you? But how are you really? How are the girls? How are the boys? And sort of talking how's your weekend? And really giving ourselves, it doesn't have to be very long. It's a 5-minute, but deep and authentic connection. Even for shorter meetings, say, right, let's go red. Red to us is let's go really quickly into outcome, what needs to be done, quite progressive and, really quite goal-oriented. If we want to stop and just ponder and ideate, we say, shall we have a yellow meeting? Yeah, let's do that. And that will be retrospective and a brainstorming. And we know we're very careful to ensure that we always have that green sprinkled in our communication, because that's the one that will remind us of the connection and actually the support that we have for one another. These conversations, whenever anything comes up that actually we do need to support each other, it's immediate. We can drop everything and we're there for you. It's actually very simple. Once you got used to recognizing where and when you need help, there is lots of help around. People are genuinely very happy to help rather than not. Right, I've got a second question and then a third, coming from one of the people who are listening today with us. So if you see signs of your colleague on the brink of burnout and unsustainable levels of anxiety, what are concrete ways that I can help other than listen to them and vent about the stress and pressure?
Yeah, the first part is to let them know I'm not alone. Let me give you 2 words that actually can help, and those are I noticed. Because a lot of us, we've been talking, Brad's been talking about, and you've been talking about, Alex, this idea of checking in with our people. What I'm hearing is from a lot of my clients too, is that I've been doing this for 14 months. I've been checking in, give me something else because, how do I keep doing this over and over again? And that those 2 words I noticed is very powerful to be able to say, I noticed there's a drop off in your work product. I noticed that you seem a little stressed lately. Is everything okay? It immediately is time for us to start noticing if people are not offering it up. Now, Alex, you've created, and probably Brad too, and your team, you've created very open environments where people are starting to share and they feel really good about sharing. Many of you that are listening maybe aren't in that place right now. So it really is up to us to notice, is somebody changing their behavior? Because unfortunately with anxiety, we feel like, everybody with anxiety acts this way. They get more talkative or less talkative. No, this is human emotion. Everybody acts differently. And so how do you notice? The only way you notice is by noticing a change. Somebody was this way and maybe they're acting a little differently, or their work product is a little different. So really that's what the next step in this, the next iteration in what we've been doing over the last year or so, is to start paying attention more ourselves.
It's phenomenal advice. And because really, in some respects, our colleagues who are struggling, and there are colleagues of ours that are struggling, spend more of their time with us than they may with family members or with other people, with friends. And so, noticing in creating an environment where folks feel comfortable to say, I'm a little concerned about so-and-so, they seem disengaged or whatever it is. And then the only other point that I'd add is, well, two other points. One is to be a good listener, to just listen to them and not to try to give advice or try to diagnose or try to counsel yourself, but listen and get to a situation where people are willing to share. And then hopefully most organizations have resources that individual can avail themselves, whether it's an EAP, an employee assistance program, or other tools that they can use to get professional help. And to know that those resources are there and that you shouldn't feel afraid or intimidated or ashamed about using them and getting help from someone. Because if we had a problem with any other part of our body, we'd go see a doctor. But for some reason, we're still mystified about the brain, and yet, you know, it is important. It's probably some of the hardest work I've ever done to work on that part of your body as well.
Thank you, Bert. One exercise which is relatively well known in my line of work, which is circle of control. So when somebody is repeating themselves over and over again, and you feel that, I'm just looking here at the comment and the question, that it is, you know, rather than listen to them vent out about stress and pressure, a good question might be things that help that person put them in a place of control. And it means that there might be just one little thing that they can control, not everything in their system, but one thing, and start with that small thing. What is it that you can control? What would need to happen that is really quite doable for you over a period of time not to have this conversation again? What can you do? So it's there are various coaching questions which are really quite gentle and quite helpful, where you do not engage in a therapeutical conversation because you don't really want to do that. But something to help that person regain a sense of control in chaos can be a good place to start, because from a neuroscientific point of view, you're then calming down someone's amygdala and the emotional brain. You're activating prefrontal cortex, which is the executive brain. So anything that helps that person regain control, however small that is, could be a good starting point as well. We've got a third question. Thanks for the questions. We've got two more. I'm just going to read it out from Daniel Slattery. Thank you. Yes, for leaders especially, authenticity is crucial, and telling your own stories of struggle as to dealing with stress and anxiety, for example. Anxiety disorder is very common, but there is still a lot of stigmatization about it, and any mental condition for that matter, which can make honest dialogue about it difficult or awkward. There are privacy concerns too. Firms and leaders need to acknowledge these circumstances openly and provide a variety of tools, including support groups and professional counseling. Very good point. I'm aware of companies, I shall not name, but I'm aware of an increasing number of companies providing professional counseling, which I think is fantastic. And I really am seeing firsthand how much the executives are benefiting from this, and it makes them much more re-energized and re-engaged with the work that they do. Thank you, Daniel, very much for that point. And we've got one more from Daniel. I just realized that there is no question here. Okay, so, but great contribution though. If this wasn't that kind of a webcast, we would have you speaking with us here in one room. So Daniel, I just realized there's no question here. How best to get people to feel comfortable, acknowledge their anxiety, and getting past shame about it, the S word.
Yeah, and this is coming to that idea of destigmatizing, that everybody feels anxiety. Now, with that said, you can't out anybody. You know, it's like, I think you've got anxiety, Alex. That you're not a therapist. You're not diagnosing. You're just helping with whatever people have. As Brad mentioned a little earlier, you know, it's the human brain. We don't, even, you know, psychiatrists really don't know a lot about this organ. It's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of throwing darts into the dark. And so what we have to do is to really be able to normalize ourselves, as we've talked before, to be vulnerable. We had this perception in the past that, you know, a partner or the leader of a team, you know, we are the best person. We're the smartest person in the room. Nothing ever affects us. And what we've realized is vulnerability is okay. In fact, vulnerability is preferred in our leaders. We want somebody who is human, who makes mistakes, who admits them, because then I can admit. And don't we want to know when there's been a mistake made so we can actually address it? You know, this idea of vulnerability is vital now in the leaders that we actually will follow. You know, the myth of the of the infallible leader is impossible. So many young people, as we interviewed, told them, you know, they have a term they call the duck syndrome, where we're supposed to look like we're floating calmly on the water, but under the surface, we're paddling like mad to stay afloat. You know, we have to be more open and honest with this.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge as well, I am speeding up a little bit. I could talk about this. We could extend the session for another hour, but we do have 4 minutes left and we could run over 2 minutes or so for those of you who still have time on the hour. But we also appreciate a lot of meetings obviously scheduled on the hour. So just to say, Michelle, thank you for a comment. Love the idea of the colored meetings, helps manage expectations, absolutely. And Herbert, thank you for your comment that you find the session also useful. You said, how can I approach to my managers and convince them that we need to create a culture that embraces change? Change is, if it's not addressed on a human level, it's very difficult to get anybody to get onto that. Hey, let's change. So my recommendation would be, there are some really good programs on change management, but start with changing self and changing self and helping others, acknowledging that there are certain change dynamics, and be very open about it to say, right, people first look at what they have to lose, not gain, by change. Not everybody is at the same level of being change ready. How do I role model change? What are your thoughts and anxieties around change? What would need to stay the same for you? So this is putting people back in a place of control for you to actually be open-minded about other things changing. Don't look at change as something global, but chunk it into components that will stay the same and little component and other components that will change over a period of time. Whether we want or not, things change anyway. We can see that by how we dress. You know, sometimes when people are very resistant to change, I laugh and say, I'm going to get you to put on shoulder pads. And they're like, no, that's in the 80s. I'm like, well, fashion changed. Why do you not want to do that? You've changed already. So there are various sort of gamifications that we also deploy in our programs to get people to be very open about their resistance to change, something that we can work through, something that we can approach a bit of humor sometimes. And then, as I said, the technique of chunking things down to say that few things I don't want to change. And there are a few things I'm actually open-minded about having them change. And you start with that process. And Maureen, thank you for joining in as well. What suggestions do you have to get someone to stop at good enough, at not be tied to perfectionism?
Brad, do you want to jump in?
It's a tough one, right? You know, I think that sometimes managing to internal deadlines to basically say, as the leader, to set the level of expectation. This is what I want from you. This is what we need, and to communicate that sometimes, either because of time constraints, budget constraints, capacity constraints, whatever it is, that eventually perfect becomes the enemy of the good, and we just need to stop and continue to get forward progress. And so I think that communicating that to your team, them understanding that you don't want them grinding to perfect, that sometimes you actually just need the answer, not a well-polished tome, is the way to go about doing it. Adrian, what do you advise on this?
You're exactly right, Brad. It's so hard because it is individualized to your team, to your department. I come back to one of the things I mentioned earlier is teaming people up sometimes is to help them understand. I remember one sales leader I talked to, and she had an employee who turned in way too detailed sales reports when she wanted her to be doing more prospecting. And so she teamed this younger employee up with somebody who was just a real go-getter, but maybe didn't do the most careful work. And they had to turn in a team sales report. And it was a silly little thing, she said, but it really helped them both. It brought the rusher back into being more thoughtful, but also push this employee. So you really have to find creative ways within your team or organization. But as Brad says, it's constant. You have to talk about this constantly to say, we're not striving for perfect here. Perfect is the enemy of getting things done. We're looking for is great work product. We can't go that extra 1%. It's going to take us forever to get there. And it's a constant struggle.
Yeah, thank you. And again, Maureen, I think it's that the concept of let's not put everything in the same bucket. There are some things that definitely, let's not stop at good enough, because maybe we're really energized and we're very ambitious, and that really matters to us to step ahead, because mastering something is a very human inherent need. We get a lot of satisfaction from it. But then also, let's be clear about certain other things that really are brilliant at good enough. I used to say that to my team at Disney, because I identified exactly the same problem. I said, with you, you are so brilliant. I want your 75%. The other 15%, I want to see you chatting and laughing and meeting in a coffee and having time in the headspace just to reset. So 75% was something way straight for. And I said to them, and I bet that when you do this 75%, wow, we're going to have incredible results. And it was. We had that psychological safety. We were freer to innovate. We were much more reflective. What are we giving in terms of our energy and resources where it was no longer needed, just to polish that extra last, full stop on a sentence. So everybody, thank you. We are now 2 minutes past the hour. We still have 70 of you here in a session. Thank you so much for joining in. There will be a few more editions of our series. Please look out Adrian's books. I am a big fan. And Brad, incredible. Kudos to you for doing the work that you do. Really, you are an exceptional role model and the kind of leader we need more in organizations, in the legal profession. Thank you so much, everybody.